Back in 1975, Ben Rich took over as the head of the Skunk Works. And the Skunk Works was an elite division at Lockheed Martin during the Cold War that designed and manufactured famous aircraft such as the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird, capable of going at over 3 times the speed of sound. One day, an engineer came to Ben Rich and said, it's possible to make an airplane that would be completely invisible to radar. Now, this had never been done before, and no one knew if it was even possible. So to prove this idea, the Skunk Works first built a wooden model about 20 feet long, and then they put it on top of a pole, and then they blasted it with radar at close distance. And then an amazing thing happened. Nothing at all. It was completely invisible to radar. And these results allowed them to get funding from the Air Force to build a quarter scale, a functioning prototype with a very tight timeline of about 14 months. And they succeeded, and this aircraft was known as Have Blue. And Have Blue flew over 100 times during the testing, which provided all the necessary data to get a very lucrative contract awarded from the US Air Force. And they now had 24 months to produce 5 fully functioning military spec airplanes, which would be capable of flying in live combat while remaining invisible to radar. And the results became very well known during the Gulf War in 1991 when Lockheed's F-117, their production stealth aircraft, flew about 1,300 missions with 0 planes lost. So why am I telling you this story? It's because the power of prototyping has been demonstrated to produce remarkable results like the F-117. What we're going to talk about today is how prototyping can be used in analytics to change the way you make decisions. My name is Jon Avrach, Senior Director of Solution Architecture and Evangelism at Sigma Computing, and I'm joined today by Sofie Garden, Senior Solutions Engineer at Sigma. Thank you all for coming today. But we're not just going to talk about prototyping. We're going to show you a live demo of it in Sigma. Sigma is an analytics product that runs in the cloud and live queries platforms like the Snowflake data cloud. For today's demonstration, Sofie will be playing the role of a merchandising manager at an electronics retailer. Now, the company is struggling and needs to make some big changes in order to survive. And back in 1997, another company was struggling. Steve Jobs had just made his return to Apple, and the business was losing money. So he did some investigation, and he concluded that the reason for this is that they had over 15 product lines with lots of variations. So Jobs decided that they would have 4 great products. And he got on stage at a very famous keynote, and he said, that's all we need. And he showed this slide. And then from there, the iMac was born, and the rest is history. So the electronics company has decided to adopt this strategy. And this means that most of the brands will end up getting dropped, which is a really difficult decision for them to make. And as we'll see, this is going to require data prototyping. So Sofie, you're the merchandising expert here. How should we go about getting started today?
I want to start with a historical analysis of which brands have been most profitable. So I know that my data team has put together a number of tables and views directly within Snowflake for me to use. And I have this retail sales view, which actually gives me individual order transactions across our entire company. This is exactly where I'm going to start.
So Sofie is creating a Sigma workbook, and this is similar to an Excel workbook, except that it's live on Snowflake. And this means we get all the benefits of scale and governance.
Now, I have responsibility, particularly just for the photography department. So the first thing I'm going to need to do here is actually filter down my data set so that I'm only looking at my department's transactions. All right, so I see that my data team has put together a couple of measures for me in this view. We have, the sales quantity, I have sales amount, cost. What I really want to look at here, though, is profit. So I can very quickly just add a new calculation where I take the total sales, subtract the cost, and I'll get my brand profit. Now, ultimately, this analysis that I want to run today, I want to do this on individual brands. So I'm going to go ahead and find my brand column here, and we're just going to look at every unique brand that I sell within photography. And so I can see here, it looks like we have about 14 unique brands. This is quite a large list, and I'm going to have to reduce this list by at least half. This is going to be a fairly tough decision. And I'm going to have to start by taking a look at the total sum of our profit for each of these brands. And I'll call this my brand profit. Now, ultimately, I'm going to have to rank these fields in some way. So I'm actually going to add another column here, and we'll just take a quick percentile of that total brand profit field, and then add some quick formatting capabilities here as well, so that I can very quickly just see my top brands in green, and then my least profitable brands in red. Okay, so this is actually fairly interesting. I can see here that the top 5 or so brands actually make up about 70% of our all-time profitability. This is actually an immediate area that we can, if I just decide initially to drop the bottom half of brands here, we can immediately start to improve our margins.
Great. So with only just a few minutes of using Sigma, Sofie has already found some important insights which will help drive her decision process. And analyzing profit is good, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So we often make decisions that only use data that's given to us. But what if we didn't have that limitation?
I have a hypothesis that I want to test. So I recently downloaded some sample product review data off of Shopify's website, and I have it sitting here just on my desktop. Now, I'm really curious, as I start to make these decisions of which brands we're going to keep, I need to make sure that my customers agree. So I can see here in this data set, I've got about 44,000 reviews across products within my department. So it's a fairly representative sample.
So this data is being uploaded via Sigma, but we're actually storing it in Snowflake. And this is really good for governance. And what it means is that business users like Sofie will be able to take this Shopify review data and incorporate it into the rest of the analysis. So let's take a look and see how that's done.
So first things first here, I can see that the majority of the review data is actually held in this JSON field. So I'm just going to really quickly transform that, which is going to let me now extract the relevant information. And I know I want this analysis to be done at the brand level, so we of course need that. I need to understand the ratings at an average level across those brands. And it might actually also be a little interesting to see what individual customers are saying about specific products within the brands that we sell. Now, the rest of this data I don't really need, so I can quickly just kind of hide it away from my analysis. Finally, I'm going to need to join this product review data in with my main analysis up top. And I'm going to do this at the brand level. So I'm going to go ahead and add a lookup here. And this is actually very similar to what I do with VLOOKUPs in Excel. I'll create a lookup to that product review sample data. And I want to really bring in the review rating for these brands. So of course I have to map it at the brand level. Okay, so this is actually pretty good. I can see that there's 100% overlap with the 14 brands that we sell within photography and the sample data that I pulled. So that's a good sign. However, I also see here that there's 100% overlap in rows, meaning we just have multiple reviews for each of those different brands. That's okay. It just means that I'm going to need to take an average of the ratings for all of those reviews at the brand level. And just as I did before, I'm going to go ahead and just add some quick formatting features here so I can quickly see the customers really and how they're rating these different brands. All right, so this is actually interesting. As I hoped, our top 4 to 5 most profitable brands are actually fairly highly rated across our customer base. So that's a good thing. It's a good sign. What's really interesting here, though, and quite frankly, something I didn't know ahead of time, is that Samsung and Polaroid seem to be very highly rated across our customer base. in the 4.5 to 4.8 product rating range. This is information that is actually fairly valuable to me. And I've actually determined that this product review data, it might be useful to even look at this on a recurring basis. What I can do now is go reach out to my data team, and they can actually purchase all of the Shopify review data directly from Snowflake's data marketplace.
So this is an example of rapid data prototyping. Sofie was able to upload the Shopify data herself and see if it's even useful. And this is just like what we saw what the Skunkworks did when they made the Have Blue prototype. So traditionally, this workflow would take months of back and forth with the data team if we could even convince them to do the work. And often it never even happens at all.
So based on these reviews, we may actually want to hold on to Samsung and Polaroid as well. I'm at a point now where I really need to start adding my own input into this analysis. And I'm going to do that in the form of a data sheet. And this is basically going to let me start to classify which brands I plan on keeping within our department. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just take this list of 14 brands. I'll just copy this over and paste it directly into my new data sheet, exactly as I would in Excel.
So data sheet is a way to add our own data. This lets Sofie take knowledge from her head and put it directly into the analysis. And as Sofie enters data into the data sheet, it gets written into Snowflake in real time. So this is another example of prototyping. In traditional workflows, you probably have to maintain separate lists and spreadsheets in different places and give them to our data team. And then they have to do a bunch of gymnastics in their data pipeline to kind of incorporate it into their cloud warehouse.
All right, so at this point, the last thing I need to do here is start classifying which of these brands we're really going to keep. Now, Panasonic, this has been our top most profitable brand all time. We are absolutely holding on to that. And quite honestly, the same really goes for SanDisk, Canon, and Sony. The top 4 brands here, they actually make up about 77% of our all-time profitability. They're not really necessarily brands that I want to let go of. Now, based on these really high reviews, I also think it makes sense to hold on to Samsung and Polaroid. I see this as potential opportunities for our business. If we're able to drive down the total production cost of the products within these brands and simultaneously target some promotional campaigns to the customers who rated these products so highly, we could actually stand to make some decent revenue across these 2 brands in the future. Now, it's a tough decision, but I'm going to have to discontinue Nikon, Fujifilm, and Insignia. Again, difficult decisions need to be made. These are fairly profitable for us, but I have to cut somewhere. The bottom 5 brands here, these are pretty easy for me to let go. They really haven't been doing anything for us from a profitability standpoint all time. The last thing I really need to do here is exactly as I did before. I want to merge my own input into my main analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and do this via another lookup. And in this case, I'm going to bring it into that new data sheet that I just created. I'll bring in my status field. And now I basically have all of my analysis from the initial brand profitability, the rating review data that I pulled in, and my final decisions on which brands we're going to keep, all in a singular view. I'm at a point now where I feel pretty ready to save this work. So I'm going to go ahead and save my workbook as my brand analysis. And what this is actually going to let me do is very quickly share this out with my colleague Stipo so that he's actually able to edit my work and even take a look at some of the brands that I've selected live with me. So I'm going to go ahead and give Stipo some edit privileges. And in fact, I can even give a comment directly to him to take a look at the list of brands I've selected. With this, we can now continue to collaborate on this document together.
So it looks like Stipo is now editing this same workbook that Sofie was just editing. We can see his icon in the top right corner, and he's also responded that he's on it right now. So this is a feature that we call live edit. And live edit allows multiple people to collaborate on the same analysis at the same time. And just like we expect from a modern cloud product, we can see the changes as they're happening. If we compare this to the traditional workflow, we might have to synchronize like who's working in the document at which time, we may have to email it around, and it gets really messy. So we can see here is Stipo is now editing the data sheet. You can see his icon in the data sheet itself. He's changed Polaroid from keep to discontinue. And based on where his cursor is, he's adding some notes right now that the audience is too young. And he's also changed SanDisk to TBD. And he has this chart that he's creating here in the top left. And the chart is taking the information that he's editing in the data sheet, building on top of Sofie's work, and it's also combining it with the profit information. So we're really combining all of these different data sources together, and they're able to collaborate it on the same time. So the reason why live edit is so important is because decisions are made by teams.
Great. So I can see that Stipo's made some edits to my work here. In fact, he's made a couple of comments as well, which we can continue to work on as we present this back to our leadership. So based on everything we've really done today, from the initial brand analysis, the review ratings I've pulled in, my own initial input, and then collaborating with Stipo and some of his feedback on the total brands that we have within our department, we've decided to move forward with Panasonic, Canon, Sony, and Samsung. And SanDisk is up to Rob. Now, finally, just as a last little step here, I want to go ahead and make some cosmetic changes to my workbook. I'm going to go ahead and add a brief title here, just so that this workbook looks a little bit cleaner when we ultimately present this back to our leadership. Now, finally, as I publish this, what this is really going to enable both Stipo and myself to do is effectively run our entire meeting directly from this workbook.
Great. So let's recap what we saw here today. We showed how prototyping can enable us to test different theories on our own. We also showed how we could combine different sources to create a much more effective analysis. We combined our core retail data, the Shopify product review data, and also the merchandising expertise from Sofie and Stipo, all into the same analysis. And then we showed collaboration, such as live edit and comments. So we could show how multiple business users can work on the same analysis at the same time as if they were in the room together. And this is breaking the BI wall. So thank you all